Hi, it's Lee and welcome to the Tesla Economist. Now, this isn't meant to be another video that goes against all the rhetoric of how the Chinese EVs will dominate the global vehicle industry. This is just another video of me explaining how, as Tesla investors, the Chinese EVs pose very little threat to our investment. Yes, the Chinese EVs appear to be arriving in droves, but so do Teslas. Both are simply compressing the legacy industry. What I plan to outline in this video is how, although a lot of Chinese EVs are popping up, Tesla is in a market segment that the Chinese can't touch Tesla on. In fact, legacy autos have a better chance than the Chinese. You see, the reason the Chinese EVs are growing so much is because of the type of battery they're using being produced at such exponential rates. And these cell types are only produced in China. I am, of course, referring to LFP cells. The vast majority of Chinese EVs are all using LFP cells. Yes, some are using nickel cells, and we'll get to them, but all the growth in China is happening with LFP. But we're only seeing them produce ranges of around low 200 miles in these vehicles, and this is always with a sedan. If they ever went for anything larger, then it would be below 200 miles with LFP cells, which wouldn't feel like much range. I think consumers have somewhat dictated the minimal requirement they're looking for in an electric vehicle. Okay, sure, BYD do have a crossover that gets just over 200 miles of range, but they achieved that by making it the worst car I've driven in my life. I say this without my Tesla fanboy hat on, if you can believe that, and I realized why. It's front-wheel drive and has the additional torque that an electric motor provides, creating even worse torque steer than an ICE front-wheel drive. However, later I also realized why it was exceptionally bad. It's because it's also lacking the weight of an engine in the front to hold the wheels down on the road, thus making traction terrible. Anyway, in other words, LFP cells do not work in SUVs, barely even crossovers. At this stage, range would be sub 200 miles. In fact, in a large SUV, they'll be even lower. The same would be true for a pickup truck, simply too big and heavy for LFP to get any range. And the same for any large luxury sedan. Of course, a van or minivan is too large too. And if you think the range in them will be bad, then the performance would be dangerously slow, as if they weren't already dangerous enough. Right, bad performance, so we'd also rule out any types of sports cars. And if you wanted some reasonable range or power, then it would mean more heavy LFP cells, which would then compromise handling and braking. Another reason LFP cells can't be used in a performance car. Now, these are just various versions of vehicles that are simply not really practical with LFP cells, or what the Chinese can offer, hence why they simply don't. If they could, they would. As we know, SUVs, crossovers and pickup trucks are the biggest, most profitable types of models in the US. And as NIO is actually a Chinese manufacturer that does use nickel cells, they actually offer 4 crossovers and SUV models, because they can manage an acceptable range. But we're just talking about types of car. There are other various market segments, like price, safety, features as well. But with electric, there are new segments too. The most obvious one being range. Long range, medium range, or short range EVs. In the US, it would seem that consumers there really want a minimum of around 300 miles of range. Tesla are scraping that limit with around 280 miles with the Model 3 rear-wheel drive, but the Model Y standard range is not for sale in the US for this reason. LFP cells can't hit long range, and therefore that means that Chinese EVs can also not hit long range. They're simply leaving out this massive market segment, and by extension, essentially the US market. But it gets worse too. A lot of the population in the US have cold winters, and as for Canada, well, even colder, which means even if a North American consumer did opt for 220 mile range Chinese EV, it would only get that much range in the summer. When winter comes, they would lose a lot of this range. And sure, Tesla have done very clever things to mitigate this as much as possible with their LFP batteries by heating them up, but even Teslas are affected by the colder climate. However, like I said, Tesla start with 280 miles. The Chinese are around 220, which is going to drop to sub 200 miles or even more. So what may have been practical in the summer may not be practical in the winter. And you want your car to work all year round, and you don't want to be charging it more when it's freezing cold outside. And these Chinese cars also have slower charging speeds on top of that, so you get less range, meaning you have to charge more frequently and for longer. And yes, like we said, there are some Chinese brands like NIO that do use nickel cells, and there are even some BYD models that use nickel cells too. but they're all still limited to the amount of nickel available. They also add to the cost of the battery lot too, and they're no longer available to compete as a low-cost alternative so much. But the point is, the Chinese do not have a path to scale up their nickel cells to the masses, unlike Tesla and potentially legacy autos. Legacy autos have something the Chinese EVs don't: brand power, supported by billions of dollars of advertising, some with over a century of heritage, with prestige and class that the Chinese will never have. All of this means the consumer is willing to pay more, all else being equal, which means legacy can thus afford to pay more for nickel cells than the Chinese. This is also why I think legacy will have a chance against the Chinese too, as they have invested into nickel cells, as they know their customers want longer range vehicles. And legacy are bringing out the dog and pony show with hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on EVs, as if it means something. But despite all that collective spending, they won't be able to make enough cells that go into more cars than Tesla will be making. Just do the numbers. We hear about these massive factories the likes of Ford are building. Well, building with their partners like SK Innovation. Because batteries are not legacy autos business at all. Engines are. Anyway, Ford plan on having about 60 gigawatt hours of battery supply. They actually claim by 2023. But obviously, it will be later than that. But still, that's only 600,000 vehicles a year. These are not big numbers. Tesla should be on about 5 times that, just in the US by around that time, with likely another massive factory soon to come online, or maybe even 2 more factories in North America. And of course, most legacy are just cannibalizing what's left of their ICE business, using their best brands like F-150. People think that it would be between the Chinese and legacy to compete over what Tesla leave for them to compete over, but it's not. China can only make small sedans and compacts with low range. That's their market. And yes, I'm sure people will comment about that's what the Japanese did, and sure, they did. But Ford, GM and Chrysler still remained. They just got a bit bruised. Besides, legacy will also eventually have their own LFP cells too. Perhaps it'll be the EV compact that they'll try and compete on. Likely the battleground will be in Europe. Legacy may find it tough to compete with their compact in China. Compact cars aren't so popular in the US, whereas they are very popular in Europe, partly due to the lower running cost in fuel with such expensive gas prices there, but also smaller roads and less convenient parking. There will of course eventually be Tesla's version of the compact too. I'm not trying to shoot down Chinese EVs. They have a massive market called China anyway. I'm sure they'll sell well there. I'm just trying to reassure Tesla investors that we do not need to be so concerned about the Chinese eating Tesla's market share, especially in Tesla's home market. In other words, Tesla will continue to have demand. Tesla has so much demand in the US and has still barely begun. There'll be plenty more to come, and this tax credit just makes it even more crazy. On top of that, the Cybertruck. So Tesla will own the larger car market. Tesla will own the long-range EV market too. Sure, Tesla also owns all other EV markets and segments aside from the micro and compact versions until they launch their compact or robotaxi. And yes, Tesla will also own the AV market too. But we don't need to worry about the Chinese taking any of Tesla's market share for those longer range markets. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.